My name is Kevin. I'm on the U19 Canadian national team for table tennis, and I'm an assistant for Ping for Alzheimer program in Markham. So tonight I'll be giving a presentation on Alzheimer's disease, basically just like how the disease happens, how we can spot the disease, intervention methods, and table tennis as a therapeutic resource. So next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Yes, how come it's not working now? Just 1 second. How come it doesn't work? Okay. Should be this one. Okay, work now.
Okay, yeah. So the first section of the presentation will just be a brief introduction to the disease. Then we'll have the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's, and then we're going to be talking about potential treatments and how sports and table tennis specifically can help patients with Alzheimer's. And finally, we're going to have a few concluding statements. Next slide, please.
It's changed.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia, and dementia refers to the loss of cognitive functioning, thinking, remembering, reasoning to such an extent that it interferes with a person's daily life activities. Alzheimer's is a progressive disease that begins with mild memory loss and gradually leads to an inability to carry on conversations in response to a person's environment. And the disease affects parts of the brain that control thought, memory, and language. Next slide, please. So who has Alzheimer's disease? In 2020, as many as 5.8 million Americans were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The number of people living with Alzheimer's will double every 5 years beyond the age of 65, and this number is expected to triple, with a total number of 14 million people expected to have Alzheimer's by the year 2060. So there are three main stages of Alzheimer's disease. We have early stage, middle stage, and late stage. So symptoms of early stage Alzheimer's include the first failures of memory, concentration, and attention, mood swings, sadness, or anxiety, difficulty coming up with the right words or names, remembering names, having trouble remembering names when introduced to new people, and having difficulty performing tasks in social or work settings. So this is mild symptoms. Then we move on to moderate symptoms, which include failure to execute simple motor movements, inappropriate behavior, insomnia, which is like not being able to sleep, and restlessness, feeling moody or withdrawn, especially in socially or mentally challenging situations, and being forgetful of events or personal history. Finally, we have the severe symptoms, which is at the late stage, and this is marked by complete loss of memory and judgment, loss of sphincter control and immobility, requires the person will require around-the-clock assistance with daily personal care. They'll lose awareness of recent experiences in addition to their surroundings, and they'll have difficulty communicating in a coherent manner. Ultimately, they will be very vulnerable to outside infections such as pneumonia, and this can lead to death. Next slide, please. So scientists have not actually found a definite cause of Alzheimer's disease. However, they have determined age and family history to be two factors that can greatly increase the risk of an individual developing Alzheimer's. So increased age does not cause Alzheimer's. However, an aging brain is more susceptible to a spread of tau proteins, which can lead to the disease. And age-related changes in the brain include atrophy, which is shrinking of certain parts of the brain, inflammation, and vascular damage. Genetic differences in familial history only account for 1 to 5% of all cases, but it does result in a higher chance of getting the disease due to the high risk factors associated with the inherited genes. Next slide, please. So Alzheimer's first affects the parts of the brain associated with memory. These are the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. It then affects areas in the cerebral cortex responsible for language, reasoning, and social behavior. Then it moves on to the other areas of the brain as the disease progresses. So it ultimately results in a lack of brain synapses, which basically synapses cause the brain to function. And when synapses stop, then the brain stops functioning. So the first main physical change that we see within the brain, other than like brain damage, is the formation of amyloid beta plaques. When abnormal levels of amyloid beta protein clump in the brain, they form plaques between neurons, subsequently disturbing their function. And the second main change we see is the formation of neurofibrillary tau tangles. And this is what happens when tau protein detaches from microtubules. And when this happens, they form tangles that block the neuron's internal transport system and communication. Next slide, please. So now for a bit more of a scientific explanation. AP protein, which also is called amyloid precursor protein, is cleaved by beta secretase using a beta cut and a gamma secretase using a gamma cut, which leaves amyloid beta peptides. Now this is a normal brain function, and everyone's brain does this. But here's where the changes happen. If the brain is unable to get rid of these peptides, these peptides, which are waste products, they clump together into amyloid beta oligomers. And these oligomers stick together, which creates large plaques outside brain cells. Note that right now, the function of amyloid precursor protein is not fully understood. And the main reason why these plaques are just so damaging to the brain is because they disrupt communication between neurons as well as brain inflammation, and they can cause brain inflammation. Furthermore, amyloid beta causes pore formation, which results in the leakage of ions. It disrupts the cellular calcium balance, and it results to a loss of memory potential. It can also promote apoptosis, which is cellular suicide, synaptic loss, and it can disrupt the cytoskeleton. Next slide, please. So next we have an in-depth analysis of neurofibrillary tau tangles. So first, tau proteins bind to and stabilize microtubules within brain cells, and they help to guide molecules and nutrients to the cell body, to the axon and the dendrites. This is normal. Now, abnormal chemical changes can cause tau to detach from microtubules and stick to other tau molecules, similar to how peptides can clump together into amyloid beta oligomers. This results in threads of tau, which eventually join to form intraneural tangles that destroy transportation networks, from cell bodies to dendrites and axons, as well as the synaptic communication between neurons. This eventually results in tissue damage and brain inflammation. Next slide, please. So now we have early onset and late onset Alzheimer's, and these are the two temporal types of Alzheimer's. Early onset Alzheimer's represents less than 10% of the cases. Signs of early onset Alzheimer's first appeared between a person's 30s and mid-60s, and it's usually caused by genetic changes passed down from family to child. Late onset Alzheimer's, which is the more common type of Alzheimer's by far, is a type of Alzheimer's where symptoms first appear in a person's mid-60s, which is considerably later than symptoms that appear in early onset Alzheimer's. And this may involve a gene called apolipoprotein A, specifically APOE epsilon 4. This is very scientific stuff. You need to know that. Next slide, please. So this is more sciencey stuff. Genetics and early onset Alzheimer's. So in early onset Alzheimer's, we can have three potential genetic causes. The first is amyloid precursor protein on chromosome 21. And if some of you may know this, some of you may not, chromosome 21 is the chromosome associated with Down syndrome, which is essentially where chromosome 21 is replicated 3 times. The second cause can be presenilin 1, PSEN1 on chromosome 14. And the third genetic cause could be presenilin 2, PSEN2 on chromosome 21, once again. So why are these presenilin mutations so important? And how can they cause early onset Alzheimer's? And this, why is this? Because presenilin mutations prevent presenilin from helping to digest free-floating beta amyloid particles in the spaces between neurons. Because these particles can't be digested, that's why they can clump together. And these 3 single gene mutations result in the production of abnormal proteins, leading to beta amyloid peptide formation. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is very, very scientific stuff. I'm not sure if anyone's going to be interested, and it's not really related to something for Alzheimer's. So I guess we can just skip over these next few slides. So next slide, please. 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 Okay. Yeah, one more. All right, perfect. Now we've reached the second stage of the presentation, where I'll be talking about diagnosis and symptoms, and we'll be examining the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. Yeah. So the first 3 warning signs of the 10 warning signs include memory loss, which is pretty obvious. It's just forgetting events, repeating oneself, and relying on memory aids. Then we have visual confusion, which is where a person with Alzheimer's will have difficulty with balance or judging distance. They'll also be tripping more often and spilling. And the third symptom or sign is like when they have problem with words. They'll have trouble finding the right words and following a conversation. An example of this would just be if a person without Alzheimer's would just say watch, but a person with Alzheimer's would just say the thing on your wrist that tells time. So clearly it's like a loss in linguistic ability. Next slide, please. The fourth symptom is withdrawal from work. And this is characterized when a person does not want to do activities that one usually does. For example, going to a sports game or like just enjoying oneself, like enjoying life. And when a person's not being able to keep up with what's happening, whether that's in the news, daily life. And then we also have another sign, which is familiar task difficulty. And this is when a person will have problems with things that they're usually very familiar with, that are things that are like second nature. For example, cooking, driving, using a cell phone, or shopping. Then we can have the sixth sign, which is time and place confusion. This is when a person will have trouble understanding an event that is happening later or losing track of dates. Finally, we have challenges in planning, which is when a person with Alzheimer's will have trouble paying bills or cooking familiar recipes that they have been using for years. Next slide, please. The last 3 symptoms begins with the misplacement of objects. And this, for example, this can be like placing car keys in the washing machine or with dryer, or not being able to retrace steps to find items lost within the house. The 9th symptom is decreased judgment. And this can include being the victim of a scam, not managing money well, hygiene issues. And then we also have changes in mood, which is when a person can get easily upset in common situations and being unnecessarily fearful and suspicious. Next slide, please. So we'll be talking about diagnosis right now. Individuals with 1 or more of the 10 warning signs should see a doctor immediately. Yes, I'm speaking to the adults in this presentation. If you feel like you have 1 or more of these warning signs, please go check with a doctor. It is earlier to check now. It's better to check now instead of just finding out you have Alzheimer's and just regretting, right? So Alzheimer's is most often diagnosed through a doctor's exam. The doctor will evaluate a patient's symptoms in addition to conducting physical examination and tests pertaining to memory, abstract thinking, and problem solving. Possible tests include mental status tests, neuropsychological tests, and interviews with friends and family. Next slide, please. We can also have brain imaging tests for diagnosis, which is like it's more scientific, more fancy. Brain imaging tests can help to distinguish between the different types of neurodegenerative diseases, in addition to establishing the degree of degeneration in the brain. 3 common brain imaging technologies are 1, magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, which uses radio waves and magnets. Then we have CT, which is computerized tomography, which uses X-rays to create a cross-sectional image. Then we have PET, which is the one we see on the figure to the right, and this stands for positron emission tomography. PET uses radioactive substances, which are called tracers, to detect substances such as amyloid beta plaques, like the substance that forms during Alzheimer's disease, and neurofibrillary tau tangles. And once the radioactive substances find these substances, it will be shown in the scan because the color will change as a result of increased concentration. And you can probably tell if you have Alzheimer's disease from that, which is really cool. Next slide, please. So then let's talk about potential treatments. And this is the part that I'm looking forward to the most. It's the part that I think everyone's looking forward to the most because that's the whole, the main idea of this presentation. So this section will be talking about how sports, specifically table tennis, can help patients with Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. In a German study conducted this year to learn more about the brain processes of table tennis players, scientists concluded that table tennis can be used to develop tailored interventions to prevent cognitive decline in the elderly. And yeah, I've hyperlinked the presentation. If anyone actually wants to read it, do let me know. I can send it to you. Next slide, please. Irisin. Irisin is a myokine or hormone produced by muscle tissue in response to exercise. Recent studies have shown that irisin enhances brain function by modulating neurotransmitter secretion, and this could benefit the Alzheimer's disease brain. Irisin's potential therapeutic roles include improving learning and memory function by regulating expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, promoting neurogenesis, and improving glucose homeostasis, all of which modulate several existing risk factors for Alzheimer's. And these arguments are depicted on the figure to the right, if you want to read that. Next slide, please. In a 2017 report, a committee of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine provided 3 encouraging but inconclusive intervention methods on how to prevent dementia of cognitive decline. The first intervention method is cognitive training, and this includes enhancing problem solving, memory, and the speed of processing. And this can be done through stuff like Wordle, Sudoku puzzles, all those brain games you see in the newspaper and the New York Times. That can be a form of cognitive training. Second, we have blood pressure management. Now, why is this? Because several studies have shown a connection between controlling high blood pressure in midlife and reducing risk of dementia later. And blood pressure can be managed by taking medications or engaging in weight loss diets. Finally, we have physical activity, and this can be achieved via aerobic exercise and strength training. And note that physical activity is not limited to high intensity exercises such as gym lifting. You do not need to bench 300 or 350, for it to count as physical activities. Just walking is a suitable alternative for individuals who are more sedentary. I mean, any form of physical activity that gets your body moving is good enough. And just any amount of physical activity, it will help in the long run if you want to prevent cognitive decline in diseases such as Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. So why table tennis? Table tennis is a very suitable sport for fighting Alzheimer's disease because it's a combination of cognitive training and physical activity, which are 2 of the 3 intervention methods. Furthermore, it does not require a high physical activity. It can activate visual spatial capabilities in patients. Table tennis's advantages are especially obvious when compared to other sports. Sports such as volleyball, basketball, tennis, and swimming require a much higher amount of movement and are much more physically demanding of the body, which will be suitable for seniors who have Alzheimer's disease. Table tennis has also been proven to stimulate the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that's usually affected by Alzheimer's. Furthermore, MRI, remember magnetic resonance imaging scans, conducted by the Bounce Alzheimer's Therapy Foundation indicated that playing regular table tennis can delay Alzheimer's by as much as 5 years. Next slide, please. Part 2. In a Japanese medical study conducted in 1998, table tennis was shown to activate higher brain function. Firstly, table tennis increased cerebral blood flow. Specifically, cerebral blood flow in the cerebellum, pons, and midbrain was increased remarkably. My citation is just Teruraki. The scientist published it in 1998. Secondly, table tennis can prevent or delay senile dementia. Using the Kena Pickout test, which is a higher brain function test, scientists Kawano and Mimura showed that table tennis players obtain higher scores in the test, as you can see in the image to the right. The black bar or the black column is significantly higher than the other column, and that just shows that table tennis players getting higher scores on the test. Also, something important that I like to note is that there's a positive correlation between the score on the Kanepeka test and the duration of the table tennis played by participants. In other words, if the participants played table tennis for a longer period of time prior to taking the test, they generally scored higher than players who play table tennis for a shorter duration. So yeah, just like in simple words, if you play more table tennis, you will have better brain function. So next slide, please. An existing program that uses table tennis to help seniors who have Alzheimer's is called Pink for Alzheimer. Weekly sessions incorporate a balance of mobility exercises and table tennis to ensure that participants can regain their bodily autonomy and get cognitive training. Although it was originally founded in France, Pink for Alzheimer has been successfully introduced to Toronto, specifically the Markham region, by the Yi Hong Senior Center. And on the right is our logo. Next slide, please. Here we have some pictures of the Pink for Alzheimer, the Markham Pink for Alzheimer chapter. These pictures show me. You can't really see me, but like basically it's just a lot of stretching. They're working on like mobility, making sure that like their arms and legs are like a bit more flexible than before. And like during the sessions, we also play with the seniors. And even if they can't hold the racket, it's okay. Like we have a lot of volunteers. Like oftentimes for like people who are very weak, we usually just help them. We hold their hands and then we like guide them through the motion to ensure that everyone like gets to like hit the ball on the table successfully. So yeah, next slide, please. Now we've reached conclusions, and I will now be talking about next step for research. Next slide, please. As of now, scientists have yet to find a definitive cause for Alzheimer's. Perhaps by finding the actual causes of the disease, we'll be able to develop more detailed intervention methods in addition to improved treatments. And as of now, the Pink for Alzheimer chapter is in Markham, but at the recent CICSA Chinese Festival, we tried to advertise it and promote it, especially at my booth, because we want to set up a program in Mississauga. So we want to make sure that the Mississauga chapter is something that will happen in the future. So yeah, next slide, please. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got to learn a little bit more about Alzheimer's, about why table tennis is a good sport to fight Alzheimer's, and about Pink for Alzheimer. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I'm very happy to answer. Does anyone actually have any questions?
Okay, for people who would like to ask questions, can unmute yourself. Can be in Mandarin. 大家可以用那个普通话去
对，
问那
我
个客人。
普通话我能说的。如果哪一位有问题，可以问我。
Okay, Kevin, this is Harris Yan, Kwame Yan.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, nice presentation though. I cannot understand much of the scientific side, but it's very interesting.
Okay.
To know the table tennis can help.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're going to set up a program in Mississauga in the planning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when and what would it somewhere in table tennis club or somewhere? You any initial idea already, or just that in the planning?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Currently, at the Chinese Festival, I was able to get in contact with MPP of Mississauga, Natalia Kusendova. And Natalia has a lot of connections because she's really interested in fighting Alzheimer's, and then she knows a lot of senior homes. And I've actually done a few email exchanges with her, and we're currently scheduling a meeting at her new office. And by the time that meeting is done, I hopefully have some more information as to like where the program will be set up. I think it's probably going to be in like a senior center. we're gonna be like putting the tables in there, and it's gonna be like a weekly session. I think that's how it's gonna look. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Yeah, no worries. Anyone have any other questions?
Kevin, just for your information, there's this one senior organization in Mississauga and the older adults. They recently just purchased a couple of the tennis table. So probably that's this organization you may contact them.
Okay. What's the organization called?
You know that I'm also old. I also probably I got some Alzheimer, so I don't remember it now. But I will email to you. I will reach out to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Just keep my mind.
Yeah, for sure.
So I need to play. So that I
yeah.
need to play tennis too.
Oh, yeah. We would appreciate everyone's support.
So they just purchased a couple of the ping pong table.
So, oh, okay. That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
That sounds perfect.
Yes. So they have the program starting. So it's good to contact them and provide your services.
Okay.